she wrote a children's book about grief. A soft little story to help kids cope when a parent dies. The cover was gentle. The words were kind. What almost no one knew, as she signed copies and smiled for the cameras, was that a jury would one day rule she was the reason those children needed it. Her name is Kouri Richins, a Utah mother of 3. And in March of 2022, her husband Eric, a healthy man with no history of drug use, died in their home of a massive dose of fentanyl. Roughly 5 times what it takes to kill a person. 5 times. For a while, it looked like a tragedy. A widow, 3 grieving boys, a community in mourning. But investigators kept pulling at one loose thread, and what unraveled was a Valentine's warning, a forged insurance policy, a quiet drug deal, and a note smuggled out of a jail cell. Before we go further, one thing matters. Everything here comes from court records, sworn testimony, and reporting. Kouri Richins maintained her innocence and she has appealed, but a jury heard the evidence and reached a verdict. This is the story of how, piece by piece, they got there. To understand the ending, start with who Eric Richins was. A hardworking Utah businessman who ran a successful stone and masonry company. Friends called him steady, generous, devoted to his 3 young sons. The kind of man who showed up, for work, for family, for everyone who needed him. Kouri was a different kind of energy. Outgoing, ambitious, always chasing the next deal. Real estate, renovations, a bigger house, a bigger life. On the outside, they looked like a power couple. Social media full of smiles, vacations, the picture-perfect Utah family. But behind the photos, prosecutors would later say, the marriage was quietly cracking. Money was tight in places it shouldn't have been. There were debts, pressure, a widening distance between a man who built things slowly and a woman who wanted everything, now. And money in this marriage was anything but simple. Eric, by several accounts, had grown careful, even guarded about his finances. He'd reportedly taken steps to protect his assets, to wall off parts of his business, to put things in a trust. Almost as if some part of him was bracing for something he couldn't name, because there was something darker, a feeling Eric reportedly couldn't shake. According to people close to him, Eric began telling friends and family something chilling, that if anything ever happened to him, they should look very closely at his wife. He didn't say it like a joke. He said it the way a man says something he's quietly afraid might come true. He even, reportedly, said a version of it to his own sister, a sentence that would echo for years after he was gone. If I die, it wasn't an accident. Then came Valentine's Day, 2022. Just weeks before his death. Eric ate a meal his wife had prepared, and within minutes, prosecutors said, he became violently, terrifyingly ill. He later told a friend he genuinely believed he was going to die that night. And then he said something else to that friend. Something no one ever wants to say out loud about the person they share a bed with. He said he thought his wife might be trying to poison him. He survived that night. He had a little over 2 weeks left to live. What was happening underneath, investigators alleged, was about money, and a lot of it. In the months before Eric died, someone had been quietly moving pieces, life insurance policies, beneficiary changes, documents prosecutors said were forged, all designed to make Eric Richins worth far more dead than alive. We're talking about coverage worth well over $1 million. Prosecutors alleged Kouri had taken out and altered policies on Eric's life, in some cases, they said, without his knowledge. On paper, the math was brutal and simple. Alive, Eric was a problem. Dead, he was a fortune waiting to be claimed. There was the house, too. An expensive mansion Kouri had set her heart on. The kind of purchase that would stretch them dangerously thin. Business accounts under strain. A lifestyle that constantly needed feeding. And one stubborn obstacle between Kouri and the life she wanted, her husband and his caution. So by late winter, the picture prosecutors would eventually paint was nearly complete. A frightened husband, a strained marriage, insurance worth a small fortune, and a wife who, they said, had already tried once and failed. Eric was scared, but he stayed. He had 3 sons, and he loved them more than his own fear. March 4th, 2022. By Kouri's own account, she made Eric a Moscow Mule that night, a cocktail, to celebrate closing a deal on a house. He drank it. He went up to bed. She said she slept in one of their sons' rooms because the boy was scared of the dark. Early the next morning, she said, she went up to wake him and found Eric cold, on the floor, at the foot of their bed. She called 911. Paramedics rushed in, but there was nothing anyone could do. Eric Richins was already gone. He was 39 years old. At first, it had the shape of a nightmare, not a crime. A young father, dead in his own bedroom. A wife screaming for help. 3 little boys asleep just down the hall. But then the medical examiner's report came back, and the shape of everything changed. Fentanyl. A lethal dose, roughly 5 times what it takes to kill a grown man, found in the body of a father who, by every account, never touched drugs. No needle, no history, no prescription, no reason. Just a poison powerful enough to drop a man where he stood. That single fact is what saved this case. Because a man who doesn't do drugs does not accidentally swallow 5 times a fatal dose of fentanyl. Investigators stopped seeing a tragedy. They started seeing a question, and they couldn't unsee it. Where did the drug come from? The answer came slowly, through phone records, messages, and one very nervous witness. Prosecutors alleged Kouri had a source, an acquaintance she'd quietly reached out to, looking for something strong. Someone who, they said, sold her fentanyl pills. Not once, twice. And the timing is what made jurors lean forward in their seats. The first purchase, prosecutors said, lined up almost exactly with the Valentine's Day illness. The second, with the very week Eric died. 2 batches, 2 attempts. The first one failed, the second one did not. The witness who described those sales did not come forward proudly. She testified about being asked for something powerful, about handing pills over to Kouri. It was the kind of testimony that turns a suspicion into a chain, link by link, leading straight back to one person. And then there was the digital trail. Prosecutors pointed to internet activity they said showed a chilling curiosity. Questions no grieving wife should ever have to ask in advance. The kind of searches that, lined up against a timeline, stop looking like coincidence and start looking like preparation. Then there was the money trail, laid out in open court. The insurance policies, the alleged forgeries, Eric's signature in places prosecutors said it never belonged. The financial pressure that gave Kouri a motive measured in over $1 million. Bit by bit, grief began to look like a plan. After Eric died, that financial picture only got stranger. There were disputes over his estate, over what he'd left and to whom, over the trust he'd reportedly set up. A man who had carefully tried to protect his money, now gone, with that very money at the center of the fight. But it's what Kouri did next that turned this into a national story. While she was, unknown to the public, already under suspicion, she sat down and wrote a children's book. A gentle picture book about a child learning to cope with the loss of a parent. She built it around staying close to the ones we've lost. She self-published it. And then she went on local morning television to promote it, sitting calmly under the studio lights, talking about helping her own 3 sons grieve their father. The same father prosecutors would say she had poisoned. Think about the nerve that would take. To smile on camera and build a brand on the grief of 3 little boys. Grief that a jury would later find she had personally caused. The book, meant to look like healing, became to investigators a symbol of just how cold this really was. Behind the scenes, Eric's family was not staying quiet. His sister and loved ones had carried that warning. If I die, it wasn't an accident. And they pushed and pushed and refused to let it go. They wanted someone to explain how a healthy man ends up dead of fentanyl in his own bed. In May of 2023, the arrest finally came. Kouri Richins was charged with aggravated murder and attempted murder. The grieving author, the smiling widow from the morning show, was now a defendant, facing the very real possibility of spending the rest of her life behind bars. And then, From inside the jail came a twist almost too strange to believe. Prosecutors revealed a handwritten note, what became known as the walk and talk. A note they said Kouri tried to slip to her mother, coaching her, suggesting things she could say that would help Kouri's defense. It was meant to be a lifeline. Instead, it became one of the most damaging pieces against her. Because to a jury, a secret note coaching a witness on what to say does not look like innocence. It looks like a guilty person trying to script a way out. As the case headed to trial in 2026, the defense settled on one real argument: reasonable doubt. No one actually saw Kouri put fentanyl in that drink. There was no video, no confession. Prosecutors could not prove the exact second the poison changed hands. But here is what the prosecution understood. They didn't need the moment. They needed the pattern. The fear. The Valentine's illness, the drug source, the forged insurance, the searches, the book, the note. Brick by brick, until reasonable doubt had nowhere left to stand. The defense fought hard for their client. They challenged the witnesses, questioned the evidence, and argued the state was stitching gaps together with a story. Suspicion, they reminded the jury, is not proof. A troubled marriage is not the same thing as murder. They begged the jurors to be certain, but the jury heard all of it. The drug source, the financial forgeries, the Valentine's poisoning, charged as attempted murder, and the husband's own words spoken before his death. If I die, it wasn't an accident. Then they went back into that room to decide. It took them about 3 hours. 3 hours to weigh a man's life and a woman's freedom. On March 16, 2026, they came back with their answer. Guilty. Aggravated murder, attempted murder, forgery, insurance fraud. Guilty on every single count. On the 13th of May, 2026, Kouri Richins was sentenced. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The widow who had written about helping children grieve would now spend the rest of her own days behind bars for creating that grief in the first place. In the courtroom, Eric's family finally got to speak. His sister, his loved ones, the people who had carried suspicion and loss for years before anyone believed them. They talked about the man Eric was, steady, loving, a father who only ever wanted to come home to his boys, and those boys are the part that never heals. 3 sons who lost their father to poison and then lost their mother to a prison cell for that same crime. In one stroke, the 2 people who were supposed to protect them most were both gone from their lives. Think about what those children are left to carry. Not just the loss, but the story around it. A book on a shelf, written in their mother's own hand, about missing a parent. One day they will be old enough to understand exactly what that book really was, and who it was truly written for. The story still isn't completely closed. Kouri Richins has appealed her conviction, new attorneys, new filings, and she continues to insist that she is innocent. A higher court will decide whether anything about her trial should be revisited. For now, the verdict and the sentence both stand. But step back and look at the whole shape of this. A woman who, a jury found, poisoned the father of her children, and then wrote a book teaching those same children how to live without him. She tried to turn the grief she manufactured into a story she could sell. And the most haunting part is how early the warning came. A man told the people he loved, plainly, more than once, that if he died, it would not be an accident. He named the danger out loud, while he still could. And still, it took years for the world to truly listen. There's a lesson buried in that, and it's an uncomfortable one. When someone tells you they are afraid of the person closest to them, believe them the first time. Eric Richins said the words plainly. The hardest part of this entire case is that he turned out to be right. Eric Richins said it himself, long before anyone was willing to hear it. If I die, it wasn't an accident. It took years, a trial, and 12 strangers in a jury box. But in the end, the world finally heard him. If a story like this stays with you, that's the point. These were real people, and there's a real father who isn't here tonight. Tell me in the comments, at what moment do you think someone should have stepped in for Eric? And if you want more cases told carefully, the way this one was, you already know what to do.